I'd like to introduce Gary from Scotland, who takes LDN for Isaac syndrome. Thank you for joining me, Gary.
Hello.
Could you tell me when you first started to notice problems?
Yes, I first started to notice problems roughly around 3 years ago. I was exhausted all the time, and I seemed to have strange movements going on in my body.
Mm-hmm. And how did that impact on your life?
Well, as things got worse, it wasn't just the physical aspect. I was tired all the time. I didn't feel I could do things I used to. It was also the fact that before I was actually diagnosed with Isaac syndrome, it was obviously a stressful period where not knowing what was wrong with me made things worse. And I now know that stress affects the Isaac syndrome. As I went on, things just got worse and worse. It was quite hard to have the illness diagnosed because it is very rare. I believe I'm one of 2 people in the UK at present. There may be more, but that's what I'm told. The physicians at the hospital took time to diagnose. I think I've been meant to have almost every illness there is, but they eventually, I was sent to neurology. The neurologist decided I had rheumatism. I said I didn't. I was sure of that, and after a lot of persistence by myself, he pushed for me to have. I pushed to have more tests, and they eventually gave me a whole series of tests. Every test he could give me, he said. And the last of these, which was an EMG test, I believe it's called, where they insert needles into your muscles, showed up the Isaac syndrome. The machine that they were using to record it basically went off the scale of movement. So that told them that it was Isaac syndrome. And their initial excitement, because they hadn't seen it in real life before, they'd heard about it, quickly turned very serious when they thought, well, there's a patient, we shouldn't be, being so happy about it. But at that time, I was prescribed Tegretol in a small dose of 200 milligrams at that time, which I have to say didn't seem to make a huge amount of difference. As time went on, I managed to get that increased to 400 milligrams. The problem with that being that I found it made me quite confused, to the extent where I'm a software programmer. I would find I was a bit forgetful, not as sharp as I once was, and although the symptoms are relieved slightly, it wasn't really an answer. I was still getting increasingly bad. Waking up in the morning being particularly bad, in so much that it's quite difficult to move. The body, the muscles go stiff overnight. Although they're moving, that sounds strange, they constantly move all over, just below the surface of the muscle. But they do stiffen up overnight, and that is particularly unpleasant. Trying to get up could take up to 20 minutes.
No.
The last time I was at the neurologist, he offered to give me immunoglobulin replacement, but that would be, it wasn't just a sort of, I believe you can get that for various things in small doses, but this was to be a large dose whereby I would have to go into hospital for a week at a time, probably once every 6 to 8 weeks, and with a maximum of 3 months relief. And in order to provide me that treatment, 1,000 blood donors is needed roughly per treatment, he told me.
Goodness.
I wasn't happy about that. I felt that there must be a better way, and I just started to look on the internet to see if there was anything else available. Now, in the meantime, I had a close friend who'd been unfortunate enough to be struck with MS, and he ended up, after 6 months or so, he wasn't able to work. He was just sitting looking miserable. He had 2 sticks to walk, and he'd really aged terribly. And I'd read about the LDN online, but he had actually independently read about it, and he had gotten it through, I think, a place in Glasgow. I can't remember where he got it. But he got it out with the NHS originally, and the improvement in him was incredible. He doesn't have the sticks now. He's back to work, and to all intents and purposes, you wouldn't know there was anything wrong with my friend at all, other than the odd balance problem he's been left with. And in the case of in the case of MS, of course you've got to inject yourself with interferon through the stomach, which is highly unpleasant, but I'm glad to see he now takes no drugs other than 4.5 milligrams of LDN per day. So having seen the improvement in him, I thought, well, I don't know if it'll do me any good, but it's worth a try. I did find some information online. I started Googling LDN plus Isaac's syndrome, or neuromyotonia is the other name for it. And I found someplace in America, which escapes me now, which there'd been some trials on, I think it was 2 Isaac's patients, and there'd been some improvement. I thought it's definitely worth a try. So I had asked my doctor about it, and I was told, at my GP, I was told that it's one of these things that needs to come through the neurologist from the hospital as a matter of protocol, I think, more than anything else. I hadn't been due to see him, so I was able to obtain some LDN for myself. Now, it was a case of I took it without the advice of my doctor, because I thought I've nothing to lose. It was 3 milligrams. I may as well try it. By this point, I was in a lot of pain all the time. Taking more Tegretol wasn't really an option, and I was really quite down about it. I could walk, but not a long way, a short walk with the dogs, that sort of thing. But generally not enjoying life to the full at all. And this was beginning to affect my work, and I was beginning to think about, longer term, is it going to be practical to keep working, this sort of thing. So I started taking the 3 milligrams, and after 2 or 3 days, I thought, I actually feel slightly better. And I thought, okay, I'll not jump the gun. These things can be a placebo, so I kept taking it. I had about 2 months' supply. Now, to give you some background, normally I would get maybe 2 to 3 weeks maximum relief in between sort of serious episodes of Isaac's, which would leave me bedridden for 1 or 2 days at a time sometimes. And I'd never had a longer period than say 3 weeks without that type of occurrence, and these occurrences could last up to a week of pain before they would subside to a reasonable level. But as the weeks went by, nothing happened. I didn't get any pains at all. I gradually felt better and better. So I really pushed my GP to get LDN for me. So he to the neurologist. Now, I knew that my neurologist was the same neurologist that my friend with MS has, who had eventually been persuaded to prescribe him the LDN. So I thought I might be in with a chance. And very fortunately for me, he wrote back and said, well, he shouldn't have been taking it without advice, but if it's made him feel better, I'm quite happy with that. Just give him the tablets. So I now have them on prescription. I think it's 3.5 milligrams actually I have, and I'm much better. I was able to go on. I went on holiday at Christmas and actually enjoy myself. I was on holiday in Madeira about a year ago, and I couldn't really do much. I stayed in the hotel mostly, walk about a bit, but I was exhausted as soon as I went anywhere. This time I've walked all over the place, up hills, down hills, all over. And, you know, I'm speaking to you tonight, I still have little or no pain from the Isaac syndrome. It's not a cure in that it doesn't, I still have the muscle movement, but I don't have the stiffness and pain, and really that's the thing that gives you the disability. The muscle movement itself just means you must eat more to make up the calories. It doesn't really do any harm itself.
So before you started LDN, if you had to rate your quality of life on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, what would it have been?
I would have said 3 or 4 most of the time. Sometimes I would say maybe 2. There were certainly times where I'd said to my wife, you know, if I was going to be like this long term, the episodes were getting longer and longer at one time. I did think that if I was going to be like that, to be honest with you, I'd rather not be here, which sounds terrible, but it's no way to live at all. I was absolutely miserable.
And what would you say to other people with Isaac's syndrome?
I would say if you're fortunate enough to be diagnosed, and although it's unfortunate to have it, it's lucky to actually be diagnosed with it and therefore be able to be prescribed something. I would say I'd push my neurologist very hard to get LDN, and I would say if you can't get it, I would use one of the other means of getting it, such as I believe there's a list of GPs who will prescribe it. I would go through them, even if it means paying the money, because I would have paid an awful lot of money to be back the way I am today, compared to what I was. I don't think you could put a price on that.
Thank you ever so much for sharing your story with us, Gary.